Strip her, the bride screamed. Let them all see what trash really looks like. She didn't know she had just ordered the assault of her fiancé's daughter. The sound of wealth had a tone. In Beverly Hills, it rang like crystal flutes clinking at brunch, like soft-soled shoes crossing marble lobbies, like a Bentley pulling silently into the driveway of a mansion with 16 bedrooms, and only one photo that mattered. Richard Callahan held that photo in his hands each morning before tying his tie. He never left the house without it. Folded carefully in the aged leather crease of his wallet, the small picture showed a girl of 9 years old, smiling wide, missing a front tooth, wearing a pink sweater too big for her. Ava, his daughter, lost 9 years ago, vanished just steps from the iron gate of their estate. She had been playing with sidewalk chalk. He remembered it clearly. A unicorn half-drawn on the pavement. Then nothing. The police searched for months. Investigators, search dogs, even drones. Billboards lit up California with her face. But after 3 years, nothing. No leads, no body, no ransom. Eventually, a symbolic memorial was held. White roses, empty casket, grief with no closure. His wife, Julia, had never recovered. Less than a year later, they found her in the guest bedroom, unmoving. The doctors wrote, severe depression. The papers called it heartbreak. Richard never corrected them. He had become a billionaire by controlling narratives. But this one, he couldn't rewrite. Today, his estate buzzed with wedding preparations. Staff hurried through the garden placing floral arrangements. Photographers tested lighting under the sycamore trees. And Vanessa Sinclair, his future wife, was rehearsing her vows on the balcony in a silk robe that cost more than most people's yearly rent. She was beautiful, sharp, and born to network. A rising star in West Coast real estate, she had met Richard during a Calcor gala. She never asked too much about Ava, and Richard never offered. He had learned to bury things, except the photo. Downstairs, Eleanor adjusted her blazer in the mirror of the guest study. She was not biological family, but blood never mattered to Richard. She had been Julia's daughter from a previous marriage, 16 when Ava disappeared, and already studying pre-law at Stanford. She never called him Dad, but Richard had raised her as his own. And in return, Eleanor had built an iron spine beneath his empire. The youngest legal counsel in Calcor history. The fixer behind the curtain. But no matter how many legal fires she put out, she couldn't extinguish the gnawing truth. She had never been enough. Not to Julia, not to Richard, not to herself. She turned from the mirror and opened a drawer, pulling out the same picture Richard carried. Ava, smiling, unchanged, frozen in time while the world kept spinning. Later that morning, Richard sat in the library, flipping through the wedding itinerary. His phone buzzed. A reminder. 11:45 a.m. Final media briefing. CNN would be live. The Calcor merger with Darvintech was set to finalize on the same day as his wedding. Callahan knows how to celebrate, the headlines said. He leaned back, closed his eyes, then opened them to look at the photo again. Ava. People assumed he had moved on. He hadn't. He couldn't. There was always a whisper inside him that she was alive, a presence, an absence that screamed too loud to ignore. Meanwhile, across the city, in the bruised heart of downtown L.A., Skid Row stirred beneath morning sun. Tents rustled. Sirens cried in the distance. Steam rose from a cracked manhole. A girl sat against a graffitied brick wall, flipping through trash for anything edible. Her name, if she could remember it fully, was Ava. She was 18 now. She had escaped something, somewhere, with scars on her arms and gaps in her memories. She didn't know who she was, not completely, just fragments, pink chalk, roses, a gate, and a man's voice calling her Sunshine. In the pile of discarded papers beside her, she spotted a glossy flyer. Richard Callahan to wed Vanessa Sinclair, this Saturday at the Peninsula Hotel, Beverly Hills. There, in the background of the photo, stood a tall man with steel-gray eyes. Her hands trembled. That man. She'd seen him before, not in dreams, in memory. She traced her fingers along the picture and whispered one word. Dad? The flyer crinkled in Ava's trembling hands. It was printed on high-gloss cardstock, corners still sharp, like someone had just dropped it from a valet stand. The man in the picture wore a tailored tuxedo, salt and pepper hair, strong jawline, pale blue eyes that somehow looked stern and gentle at the same time. His fiancé stood beside him in a couture gown, diamond smile gleaming. But Ava only saw him. Dad, she whispered again, this time louder. She didn't know where the word had come from. It had just burst out like something long buried, clawing its way to the surface. Around her, life on Skid Row moved in its usual rhythm. People yelled about nothing. An old radio played Marvin Gaye from a milk crate. A mother brushed lice from her daughter's hair. And amid it all, Ava stood frozen, hair matted, cheeks hollow, wearing a hoodie 2 sizes too big, and shaking with something she couldn't name. Memory? Hope? Madness? She didn't care. She clutched the flyer to her chest, then ran. The streets blurred past her. She had no money, no phone, no map, but she had legs. And somewhere deep in her fractured mind, a compass had realigned. Beverly Hills. She knew that name. She didn't know how she had ended up in Skid Row. She remembered flickers, cold hands pulling her from a van, a hospital room with no windows, the smell of bleach and rubber gloves, a woman with red lipstick and a voice that cooed and cut in equal measure. Then darkness. Her body bore the story better than her mind, scars near her rib cage, a burn mark behind her ear. But now, holding this flyer, things were shifting. Her name was Ava Callahan. She didn't know how she was so sure. She just was. It was a 32-mile journey from Skid Row to Beverly Hills. She didn't stop to calculate the distance. She just started walking. Past men who shouted crude names at her, past mothers who pulled their children aside, past coffee shops where no one looked up from their phones. By noon, her legs ached. By 3 p.m., she was bleeding from the heel. By sunset, her throat was raw and her vision swam. But she never let go of that flyer. At one point, she passed a giant LED billboard above the Wilshire Promenade. A new CalCorp ad played in bold cinematic fashion, flashing images of clean energy grids, glistening architecture, young engineers in labs. Then came the voiceover. Investing in a future, with vision, with heart, with Callahan. And just like that, there he was, Richard Callahan, standing in front of a blueprint wall, shaking hands with foreign dignitaries. The same eyes, the same presence. Ava stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. Cars honked. Someone yelled at her to move. She didn't hear them. Tears fell. She wasn't crazy. He was real. As night crept over the palm-lined streets of Beverly Hills, Ava arrived at the gates of the Peninsula Hotel. She had never seen a place like this. Doormen in white gloves, chandeliers dripping from lobby ceilings, luxury cars lined up like ornaments. The air smelled of roses and money. And her. She smelled like street sweat and asphalt, like fear. But she clutched the flyer tighter and approached the front steps. One of the valets looked up and visibly recoiled. "Whoa, hey, this isn't a shelter," he said. "I need to see Richard Callahan," Ava said, her voice rasped by dust and exhaustion. He's my father." The valet blinked. "Excuse me?" "I'm his daughter," she said again, louder now. "I know I don't look like it, but I swear, my name is Ava Callahan. I was kidnapped. Please. He's here, right? He's marrying her. I saw the flyer. Just tell him I'm here." A security guard stepped between them. "Miss, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "Please, I'm not lying." Guests on the front steps began to stare. A woman in a sequin dress whispered to her husband. Someone took out a phone and began filming. That was when she appeared. Vanessa Sinclair, the bride-to-be. The words hit the crowd like a slap. The guards hesitated. "You heard me," Vanessa hissed. "She's clearly trying to scam us. Maybe she has a wire. Maybe she's hiding something. Tear it off." The cameras were still rolling. Ava backed away. "No. No, don't." The first hand grabbed her shoulder. Another tugged at her sleeve. "Stop! I'm telling the truth." The crowd didn't move. The press kept filming. No one helped her, until her knees gave out, and everything turned black. The crowd was still. Cameras kept recording. Flash after flash ignited like fireworks. Yet not a single person stepped forward. Ava's body lay crumpled at the foot of the grand marble staircase, right beneath the gilded arch where moments earlier, guests had toasted champagne in honor of Richard Callahan's wedding. Her skin, ghost pale under the golden lights, was streaked with grime, blood, and disbelief. Security hesitated. Even they hadn't expected her to collapse. And Vanessa Sinclair, she simply sipped her wine. "I told you to remove her," she said again, voice silk-wrapped steel. "Don't make me repeat myself." But something had changed in the air. The hush was heavy. Even the violins inside the ballroom had stopped mid-note. A valet whispered, "Is she breathing?" A staff member crouched down, touched Ava's wrist, and nodded. "Pulse is faint." That was when a voice cut through. "Stop! Do not touch her again." All eyes turned. Eleanor Callahan stood at the top of the staircase, backlit by the crystal chandelier behind her. Her sharp black suit made her look more formidable than the judge who'd officiate the wedding. Her heels clicked deliberately as she descended one step at a time, each step slicing through the crowd's paralysis like a blade. Vanessa blinked. "Eleanor, this is none of your—" "I said stop." Her voice was calm, but final. "She's a minor. She's unconscious. You're not authorized to physically remove her until she's assessed by medical professionals. She's clearly a fraud. She's clearly in distress. That makes her a liability if you put your hands on her again." Eleanor crouched beside the girl. The smell of the street clung to her skin. Urine, oil, something sour. But Eleanor didn't flinch. She looked at Ava's face, up close now. Then she froze. Her breath caught. Because those eyes, even half closed, bruised and sunken, they were familiar. And that nose, and the shape of the cheekbones. And something in her gut twisted, not in repulsion, but recognition. Could it be? Ava Callahan, the girl in the photo Richard still carried. The sister Eleanor never truly knew, the ghost that haunted the estate. She stood and turned to the security guard. "Call an ambulance and a private forensic nurse." The guard hesitated. "Ma'am, she doesn't have ID. The police already—" Eleanor raised a single brow. "She collapsed on private property, in front of 57 witnesses. If she dies, every guest here is complicit. That includes you. Vanessa stepped forward, face flushed. You don't get to issue orders. This is my wedding. It's still under Calcor's media supervision, Eleanor replied smoothly. And as the firm's general counsel, I have legal jurisdiction to protect corporate interests, including preventing this from turning into a PR bloodbath. Vanessa clenched her jaw but didn't speak. The ambulance was on its way. Eleanor turned to a junior assistant who had followed her down. Get Dr. Lucas Yates on the line. Tell him it's urgent. Yes, Ms. Callahan. 10 minutes later, the lobby was roped off from the main ballroom. Eleanor had personally arranged for Ava to be moved into the hotel's private lounge, away from press and guests. 2 EMTs checked her vitals. One whispered that she was malnourished, dehydrated, and burning up, but still breathing. Outside, the internet buzzed. The live footage of the incident had already gone viral. Callahan wedding, meltdown, #Vanessa strips the homeless. Is she his daughter? Eleanor ignored it all. She sat in the dim corner of the lounge, arms crossed, watching the girl's chest rise and fall beneath the thin emergency blanket. Ava mumbled in her sleep, fragments of words. Gate, chalk, pink sweater. The fragments hit Eleanor like stones. Her mother, Julia, used to say that Ava would draw unicorns on the front steps every morning, that her favorite sweater was bubblegum pink. Coincidence? Or karma? Eleanor stood and dialed her private line. Dr. Lucas Yates answered on the first ring. Lucas, I need a DNA test. Quietly. On site. ASAP. Whose sample? I'll give you a cheek swab, and I'll need you to compare it to my father's. Why not just ask Richard for... Because I'm not ready to tell him yet. Lucas paused. You think she's Ava? I don't think. I'm afraid she might be. That night, as the wedding celebration raged on upstairs, guests dancing, toasting, laughing, Eleanor stayed below, with the girl. Her heels were off, her blazer tossed over a chair. She hadn't planned to be anyone's hero today. She'd planned to sign legal contracts and smile for cameras. But something in Ava's face had cracked open an old ache she'd buried years ago. She reached into her purse and pulled out the small photo she always kept in the side sleeve. Ava, age 9, gap-toothed grin, holding a toy unicorn, sunlight in her hair. She compared it to the girl before her. Same jawline, same eyelashes, no doubt anymore. No. Across the hotel, Richard Callahan stood near the champagne tower, unaware. He had not yet heard that a girl had collapsed outside. He had not yet seen the footage going viral. He had not yet realized that somewhere in the room below, the daughter he buried 9 years ago had come home. The music swelled in the ballroom. Golden chandeliers sparkled above a sea of black ties and couture gowns. Every table gleamed with gold-trimmed menus and imported orchids. A string quartet played Vivaldi while guests sipped $1,000 champagne, oblivious to the storm quietly gathering just one floor below. Richard Callahan stood near the head table, flanked by board members, laughing politely, eyes scanning the crowd, but never really landing. He felt off. The champagne was chilled perfectly. The speeches had landed well. Even the stock market had nodded in his favor that day. And yet, there was a hum beneath his skin, like the air before an earthquake. Across the room, Vanessa caught his gaze and waved with her flute. Her lipstick had been reapplied, her mask flawless. No one would guess what had happened outside an hour ago. She had spun it well. A deranged wedding crasher, she'd whispered to one of the producers from CNBC. The staff took care of it. Smile. tilt, distraction. No one had dared press. But something in Richard's chest tightened, and it wouldn't let go. Downstairs, in the hotel's private lounge, Eleanor sat beside Ava's still body. A small IV bag dripped fluids into her arm. A nurse from Lucas Yates's private network checked her vitals again. "Temperature's down slightly," the nurse said quietly. "She should wake up soon." Eleanor nodded but said nothing. She was staring at Ava's eyes. Even in sleep, there was something specific about them. Their shape, almost feline, tilted slightly upward at the edges, the way her eyelashes curled like her mother's, and the faint freckle under the left eye. Ava stirred. Her lips moved. Eleanor leaned in. "Eleanor." The word was barely audible. A breath. A whisper. But it sent ice down Eleanor's spine. She stood abruptly. "She said my name." "You sure?" "She's never met me. She's never seen me. But she knows me." The doors opened. Lucas Yates walked in, carrying a discreet black satchel and a portable testing device. He looked tired but ready. "Got everything," he said. "Rapid DNA panel. Results in under 90 minutes. Eleanor handed him a small envelope. Inside was a cheek swab she had quietly taken from Richard's razor earlier that day, a move both brilliant and borderline illegal. "And her sample?" Lucas asked. The nurse handed over a swab taken from Ava minutes earlier. Lucas began preparing the panel. While the machine whirred to life, Eleanor paced the room like a caged animal. "If it matches..." "When it matches," Lucas corrected softly. "You're that sure?" Lucas glanced at Ava, then at Eleanor. "You're not the only one who remembers those eyes." Meanwhile, in the ballroom, Richard stepped out onto the terrace. The noise inside had become too much, the air too hot. He loosened his collar and looked out over the Los Angeles skyline. The city he'd conquered. The city that still haunted him. His hand moved unconsciously to his wallet. He took out the photo. Ava, age 9, wind-blown hair, pink sweater. He stared at it a long time. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. A message from Eleanor. "I need you to come to the lounge. Now. Don't bring anyone." His heart skipped. He didn't know why, but he obeyed. Back downstairs, the DNA machine beeped. Lucas stared at the screen. Eleanor leaned over his shoulder. "What's it say?" Lucas turned slowly. His voice was quiet. "Paternal match. 99.93% probability." Eleanor closed her eyes. She had prepared for this moment intellectually, but not emotionally. This wasn't a headline. This wasn't a courtroom. This was family. "She's Ava," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "She's really Ava." Just then, the door opened. Richard stepped in. "Elle?" His voice echoed. "What's going on?" She turned. Her eyes were red. He froze when he saw the girl on the couch. "Who is that?" Eleanor didn't answer immediately. Instead, she crossed the room slowly, then gently placed the childhood photo of Ava on the side table next to the girl's sleeping face. Then she whispered, "I think you already know." Richard stared. His knees buckled slightly, hand reaching for the armrest of a nearby chair. He approached. 1 step. 2. He stopped directly in front of her, his breath caught. The freckle, the cheekbones, those lashes. And then she opened her eyes, for the first time, and met his. There was a pause, a silence thick enough to fill the Grand Canyon. Then her lips moved, dry, cracked, but certain. Dad? And that was it. Richard collapsed to his knees, his hand over his mouth, his entire frame shuddering. His voice cracked open after 9 years of silence. Ava. He reached for her hand. She reached back. And for the first time since that awful afternoon by the gate, she came home. In the sterile quiet of the Gen Bio lab, where the scent of antiseptic and coffee hung in the air, Eleanor sat across from Dr. Lucas Yates. Her hands were folded on the table, tight with restraint. Her nails dug into her palm with every passing minute. The room buzzed faintly with the hum of machines, PCR analyzers, gel electrophoresis units, sequencers that had witnessed thousands of secrets come to light. But today, this room held only one truth that mattered. Lucas tapped a final key on the laptop in front of them, eyes fixed on the screen. He didn't blink. Then, slowly, he turned the monitor to face her. Paternal match, 99.93%. Subject A, Ava Callahan. Subject B, Richard Callahan. Eleanor didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just stared. And then she breathed, for the first time in hours, as though her body had been holding its breath for 9 years. She's his, Lucas said softly. There's no doubt. Eleanor nodded, her voice flat but tight with emotion. We found her. Just hours earlier, she had escorted Ava, now conscious but fragile, to the private CalCorp SUV, with tinted windows and soft leather seats, shielding her from the press swarming the Peninsula Hotel. Richard had ridden with them in silence, gripping his daughter's hand like a man terrified she might vanish again if he blinked. Now, as the car pulled up outside the lab, Richard stepped out slowly. The man who had once commanded rooms of world leaders looked like a ghost of himself. His usually perfect suit was wrinkled, his tie undone, but his grip on Ava's hand never loosened. Inside the lab, Eleanor met them in the waiting room. Ava's eyes lit up slightly at the sight of her. There was something unspoken forming between the two girls, sisters by circumstance, not blood. One raised in wealth, the other in shadows, but both, in some way, survivors. Richard stepped forward. I want to see the result, he said. Lucas nodded, handed him the printout. The CEO of CalCorp, a man who had signed $2 billion mergers with a flick of a pen, now held a single sheet of paper as if it were the most fragile object in the world. He read it. And then sat. Right there on the bench by the window, knees shaking. Ava sat beside him. He turned slowly to her. I thought you were gone, he said, voice ragged. I was, she replied, her voice barely a whisper. I buried an empty casket, he said. Your mother, she blamed herself. She couldn't. His voice broke. I don't remember everything, Ava whispered, but I remember your voice. I remember the gate, and I remember pink chalk. That shattered him. Richard broke into sobs, leaning forward, clutching his daughter's hand like it was a lifeline. Lucas and Eleanor quietly stepped away, leaving them alone. In the adjacent corridor, Eleanor turned to Lucas. We can't wait. We need to track where she's been. Who took her? Why she's only resurfaced now. Lucas nodded. There are scars, physical ones. Someone kept her somewhere. And not kindly. We need access to all private facility records, medical institutions, shelters, anywhere with intake logs under Jane Doe, roughly 9 years ago. Lucas hesitated. You think this wasn't random? I think it was orchestrated. Eleanor's eyes hardened. And I'm going to prove it. Meanwhile, back in the lab, Richard took out his wallet. Gently, reverently, he pulled out the photo he'd carried for 9 years. Ava stared at it. "That's me," she said. He handed it to her. "It's yours now." She held it like treasure. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket again, pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside, delicate, glittering, was a tiny, heart-shaped pendant. "It was your mother's," he said. "She wore it the day we met. She always said she'd pass it down to you." His fingers shook as he clasped it around her neck. Ava's hand rose to touch it, and for a moment the air held the weight of everything they had lost, and everything they were just beginning to reclaim. That night, Eleanor drove home alone. She passed downtown traffic, the blinking lights of the freeway, the glowing billboards that still flashed CalCor's branding. But her mind was elsewhere. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt haunted. Because if Ava had been alive all this time, that meant someone had kept her hidden. That meant someone had lied. And the one person who had the resources to fake records, erase identities, and silence people in Los Angeles high society was now preparing to marry into the Callahan name. Vanessa Sinclair. Back in Beverly Hills, Ava stood in the garden of the Callahan estate. The last time she had been here, she had drawn unicorns on the sidewalk with pink chalk. Now, she was 18. Her eyes scanned the roses, the path, the black iron gate. And suddenly, like a jolt, the memory came. She had been standing right here. Then the sound of heels, a hand grabbing her, the scent of lavender and latex, and a voice, soft, cold, familiar. "Let's go for a ride, sweetheart." The view from the 42nd floor of the CalCor Tower was breathtaking. Beyond the tall windows stretched the Los Angeles skyline, gleaming glass, traffic arteries, rooftop pools. It was a view built on power, silence, and secrets. And Eleanor Callahan knew that better than anyone. She hadn't climbed here on sentiment or scandal. She had earned it, with bloodless arguments, airtight contracts, and the unwavering resolve of someone who had never truly belonged. Until now. Now she had a sister. Now she had a mission. And now she had a name in her crosshairs. Vanessa Sinclair. At 6:43 a.m., Eleanor walked into the legal archives like a storm in heels. She bypassed the biometric scanner with her executive credentials, strode past junior clerks barely awake, and made her way into the restricted records vault. Inside were the legal footprints of every CalCor deal, shell company, medical subsidiary, and confidential settlement ever filed. Her hands didn't shake as she pulled up a hidden database, one even Richard rarely touched. CalCor Private Holdings, Sinclair Foundation, Medical Partnerships, Confidential. Her eyes narrowed. St. Marguerite Psychiatric Hospital, Malibu, CA. Closed-door agreement, 1.2 M annual grant, signed by Vanessa Sinclair, Director of Development. But that wasn't the real shock. The shock was the year listed, 2014, the same year Ava disappeared. Eleanor picked up the phone. "Lucas, I need a trace on a facility, St. Marguerite Psychiatric. Cross-reference Vanessa Sinclair's employment history, and send me anything involving Julia Callahan, my mother." Lucas's voice on the other end was tight. "You think she worked there?" "I think she did more than that." Meanwhile, in a quiet guest room at the Callahan estate, Ava sat cross-legged on the floor with a sketchbook open on her lap. She had barely spoken since arriving, still too much fog in her brain, too many moments floating just beyond reach. But something about being here, home, was beginning to unlock her. She pressed the pastel to the paper, drawing with instinct. A gate. Pink chalk. A red-lipped woman leaning down with gloved hands. She didn't know her name, but her face was burned into memory. At noon, Eleanor arrived at the Callahan estate. She found Ava in the sunroom, flipping through a leather-bound journal that had once belonged to Julia, Eleanor's mother. Richard had locked it away after Julia's death. Now it sat in Ava's hands, its spine worn with time. "Eleanor?" Ava said softly. "Yes?" "I think this belonged to my mom." Eleanor walked over, knelt beside her. Together, they read. April 15th, 2014. Ava's been having nightmares again. She keeps saying there's a woman with red lips standing at the gate. Says she talks to her when no one's around. But when I ask her, she can't describe her voice. Only that it feels like ice on her skin. Eleanor's throat tightened. Ava flipped the page. May 3rd, 2014. I think I'm losing time. I made soup yesterday, and by dinner I couldn't remember. My appetite is gone. The headaches are back. Something is wrong, and I can't help but think, someone is doing this to me. Eleanor stood. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. That evening, Lucas called. I found the missing link. Eleanor's heart pounded. She was a nurse, he said. Vanessa Sinclair worked at St. Marguerite from 2013 to 2015 under a different name. Vanessa Dalton. Psychiatric ward. She was Julia's attending nurse for 3 months before Julia died. And no one flagged this? It gets worse, Lucas said. Julia had complained repeatedly about memory issues. Medical logs show her blood work had traces of sedatives never prescribed. But the physician who signed off on her death later received a payout from a CalCorp subsidiary, approved by Vanessa. Eleanor's blood turned cold. She orchestrated it. She buried it, Lucas replied. And then she rewrote her own history. At midnight, Eleanor opened a private drawer in her home office. Inside lay a single USB drive, marked only with a number. She plugged it in. Surveillance footage, medical reports, financial transfers, and then one image froze her breath. A photo of Vanessa Sinclair in a nurse's uniform, standing behind Julia Callahan's wheelchair, smiling faintly at the camera. The caption, 2014, St. Marguerite. Eleanor's fingers curled into fists. There was no more doubt. Vanessa had worked at the facility where Julia Callahan lost her mind, and where Ava vanished. Back at the estate, Ava stirred in her sleep, and whispered again, into the dark. She said my mom didn't love me anymore, that she gave me away. The car ride was silent. Eleanor drove with both hands on the wheel, her jaw tight, eyes unblinking behind her sunglasses. Ava sat in the passenger seat, hands clutching a manila envelope that Eleanor had given her that morning. Inside was a copy of her mother's journal. Every entry Eleanor had marked in red, pages detailing the creeping symptoms, the sudden paranoia, and then, at the end, Julia's final words. If something happens to me, don't trust the nurse. Her smile never reaches her eyes. Tell Eleanor, I know she's not my daughter by blood, but she is family, and if she ever finds Ava, she'll know what to do. Ava hadn't spoken since she read it, but Eleanor didn't press. She knew grief wasn't loud. It sat beside you like a shadow, and today they were driving straight into one. They arrived just after noon. San Diego's ocean breeze carried a strange scent, salt and sadness. The house was small, stuccoed in sun-faded yellow, tucked behind a dry rose hedge on a quiet cul-de-sac. This was once the residence of Dr. Randall Healy, the former chief medical officer of St. Marguerite Psychiatric Hospital. Lucas had pulled the address from an old payout ledger buried in Calcor's medical archives. Dr. Healy had signed off on Julia Callahan's death certificate and then quietly retired, with no public explanation. Eleanor knocked twice. No answer. She turned to leave. Then a voice croaked from behind the door. "You're her daughter, aren't you?" The door creaked open. Inside stood an old man, gaunt and hunched, his eyes yellowed with age, but sharp. "I've been waiting," he said. The interior was dim, cluttered with unopened mail, dusty trophies, and an oxygen tank humming near his recliner. He motioned them to sit, coughing into a cloth. "I won't lie to you. I kept silent too long. I was paid well, but guilt doesn't go away." Eleanor folded her arms. "Tell us everything." Dr. Healy sighed. "Your mother wasn't crazy. She was made to look that way. Vanessa, she brought her in with a mental break. Said she was a risk to herself. She filed false reports, administered unprescribed drugs, isolated her from family." "She was my mother," Ava whispered. Dr. Healy looked at her, sorrow softening his face. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. You were at the facility once. I remember you, quiet, always drawing. You were there under a Jane Doe tag. Vanessa said your mother abandoned you. We believed her." Eleanor leaned forward. "Why didn't you report it?" "I tried, but before I could speak to a board member, I received a legal letter from Calcor's health subsidiary. Vanessa had looped in corporate lawyers. 1 week later, I was offered early retirement, with a confidentiality clause and a house in San Diego." "And you took it," Eleanor said coldly. "I did," he admitted. "But I kept something." He stood slowly, opened a hidden drawer under his bookshelf, and pulled out a locked case. Inside, Julia's original intake file, handwritten notes, blood work with sedative levels off the chart, an audio tape marked Confession, VS. Dr. Healy handed it all to Eleanor. "I don't need forgiveness, but I want the truth to outlive me." Ava held her mother's intake file like it was holy. Then she found a small photo tucked between the papers. A grainy snapshot. Her mother in a hospital gown, clutching a child. Her, and behind them, a nurse with piercing eyes and red lipstick. Vanessa. That night, they drove back to Los Angeles in silence again. But something had changed. Ava's head leaned against the window, eyes open, watching the night blur by. Then quietly she spoke. "I remember her now." Eleanor glanced over. "She told me my mom didn't love me, that I was a mistake, that Daddy didn't want me either." Eleanor's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "She took me in a white van," Ava continued. "She gave me a new name. She made me sleep in a room with no windows. I tried to run once. She said if I did it again, she'd make me forget everything." Eleanor's voice was hoarse. "She nearly succeeded. But I never forgot my mom's voice," Ava said. "Or yours." They didn't speak for a long time after that. But as the lights of Beverly Hills came into view, Eleanor reached across the car. And for the first time, she held Ava's hand. Sister to sister. No more ghosts. Just truth. And reckoning. The courtroom was full before 9 a.m. Every seat packed. Reporters whispering into lapel mics. Camera crews lined the marble corridor outside. Social media buzzed like a live wire. Callahan trial was trending globally. At the center of it all stood a young woman in a charcoal suit, tailored but simple, her long hair pinned back, eyes steady, jaw clenched. Eleanor Callahan. She was not a prosecutor, but today she represented her sister and justice. Across the room sat Vanessa Sinclair, elegant as ever in a cream pantsuit, her hair in a flawless bun, sunglasses pushed back atop her head like a crown. She did not look nervous. She looked untouchable. Next to her sat two of LA's most expensive defense attorneys. But no amount of money could erase what Eleanor was about to present. Because now, the shadows had names. Dates. Proof. The judge entered. Court is now in session. Case number 48273, Callahan v. Sinclair. Charges include aggravated fraud, conspiracy to conceal a missing minor, identity falsification, unlawful psychiatric confinement, and wrongful death. Ava, seated behind Eleanor, took a breath. Richard sat beside her. His hand never left hers. Eleanor began. She didn't pace. She didn't yell. She let the truth do the damage. She displayed Julia Callahan's original medical file, including test results showing sedative levels 6 times above therapeutic range. She played the audio tape, Vanessa's recorded voice, saying, "She's losing time. Good. If she forgets the girl, she won't go looking for her." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. The defense objected. Illegally obtained. The judge allowed it under whistleblower protection. Then Eleanor called Dr. Healy to the stand. He testified, voice shaking, that Vanessa had manipulated the hospital's intake procedures, signed Ava in as a Jane Doe, and filed false reports to sever the mother-daughter bond. He confirmed the hush money, the faked credentials, the vanishing act. The defense tried to rattle Eleanor. They questioned her motives, suggested a vendetta, but she remained calm, until they asked, "Ms. Callahan, are you even biologically related to the victim?" Eleanor stood taller. "No, but I am her sister, and I am the daughter of the woman your client destroyed." Silence, then applause from the public gallery. The judge slammed the gavel. "Order." When Ava took the stand, the room fell quiet. She was nervous, but Eleanor nodded at her gently, and she spoke. Clear, unshaking. She told me my mother gave me away, that my father didn't love me. I was locked in a room with no windows. When I cried, she laughed. When I screamed, she gave me pills. But I never forgot their voices. I never forgot who I was. I'm Ava Callahan, and I'm not invisible anymore. Vanessa finally flinched. The final blow came from Lucas Yates, who presented facial recognition logs showing Ava's childhood photo had a 93% match with the girl found at the wedding, corroborated by 3 independent biometric firms. And then came the final twist. Eleanor submitted a CalCorp financial report, signed by Vanessa, approving the hush money paid to the corrupt doctor. The defense had no rebuttal. The courtroom held its breath, and the judge finally spoke. Given the overwhelming evidence, the court hereby rules in favor of Ava Callahan. A criminal trial against Ms. Vanessa Sinclair will proceed with immediate charges. Ms. Sinclair is to be taken into custody. Gasps. Vanessa stood, stunned. As the bailiff moved in, she panicked. "I built this family. You think she matters more than me? I gave up everything." But her words were drowned out by the sound of handcuffs. Click, click, and then silence. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Richard gave no statement. Ava whispered, "Can we just go home?" Eleanor smiled and nodded. They walked to the car. Sisters. No security. No PR team. No headlines. Just healing. It had been 3 months since the verdict. 3 months since Vanessa Sinclair was escorted out of the courtroom in handcuffs, her legacy shattered, her crimes laid bare for the world to see. But in the wake of destruction, something unexpected had begun to bloom. Not revenge, not fame, but healing and hope. The Cal Corps Board offered to reinstate Eleanor as chief legal counsel with expanded authority. She declined. "I have something more important to build," she said. Instead, she withdrew her name from all executive roles, liquidated a private trust her mother had left her, and used the funds to co-found a non-profit with Ava, the Lightwell Foundation. The mission was simple, yet radical: to find, support, and protect young girls who had slipped through the cracks, those labeled runaways, delinquents, or mentally unstable, when in truth, they were often victims of trafficking, medical exploitation, or abuse by people in power. Their first office opened inside an old firehouse in Culver City. The second, in a donated wing of Stanford University's Social Justice Center. Eleanor handled legal frameworks, liaised with social workers, built partnerships with law schools and state agencies. Ava? She was the heart of it. Each morning she greeted the new girls who walked through the door, timid, silent, eyes hollowed from fear. She understood them without a single word exchanged, because she had been them. And now she was living proof that survival didn't have to mean silence. She sat with them in art therapy classes, shared her story at public schools, hosted late-night crisis calls with teens who had no one else to call. She never claimed to be an expert. She just showed up, with truth and tenderness. Back in Beverly Hills, Richard Callahan transformed too. He stopped attending shareholder meetings. He no longer appeared in business magazines or on CNBC specials. Instead, every morning, he made breakfast for Ava. He was clumsy at it, burned eggs, lopsided pancakes, but he tried. He sat beside her while she studied for her GED and later her Stanford admission essays. He didn't try to erase the lost years. He simply learned to be present for the ones still left. "I can't give you back your childhood," he said once, "but if you'll let me, I'd like to walk beside you through the rest." Ava squeezed his hand. "I'd like that." One crisp Saturday, Stanford University invited Ava to speak at their annual Voices of Change symposium. She stepped onto the stage in a simple navy dress, her speech notes trembling in her hands. But her voice didn't tremble. Not anymore. "They told me I was invisible, that no one would believe me, that I was a mistake. But I wasn't. And neither are the millions of girls who go missing each year and are never looked for. You don't have to be famous to matter. You don't have to be wealthy to be worthy. You just have to be seen. I am Ava Callahan. I was taken. I survived. And I will spend the rest of my life helping others do the same." The room stood, not out of politeness, but because her truth left them no choice. After the symposium, Eleanor found her sister backstage, eyes still shining. "You crushed it," Eleanor said. Ava laughed. "I thought I was going to throw up." "You didn't. You changed someone." They hugged, and in that moment, years of pain folded into something softer, something whole. Back at the Beverly Hills estate, Richard had turned the once guarded guest suite into a personal study and library. On the shelves sat framed photos. Ava as a child, Ava at the courthouse, Ava and Eleanor at Lightwell's ribbon-cutting ceremony. But the center of the room held only one object, a worn sketchbook. Ava's. He had found it beside her bed one morning. Inside, she had drawn a garden, the old gate, the pink chalk, and two women standing side by side beneath a blossoming tree, one with dark hair, one with light, both holding hands, both smiling, both free. The sun was sinking low over Beverly Hills, casting long amber streaks across the manicured hedges and polished limestone of the Callahan estate. The once imposing mansion, once a shrine to silence and legacy, now held warmth in its corners. The staff no longer walked on eggshells. The air no longer echoed with absence, and the garden, once frozen in time, had come back to life. Under the old rose tree near the black iron gate, Ava Callahan sat barefoot on a stone bench, a worn leather journal in her lap. She wasn't a ghost anymore. She was home. The journal was hers now, a gift from Eleanor, filled with blank pages and soft parchment. On the first page, Ava had written a single title in careful print. My Story, The Girl at the Gate. She had rewritten it many times in her mind. It wasn't just about the day she was taken, or the darkness that followed. It was about what came after, the moments that pieced her back together. She glanced toward the horizon, where streaks of coral and lavender stretched like brushstrokes across the California sky, and then she heard footsteps. She turned. Eleanor walked toward her, dressed simply in jeans and a linen shirt, a thermos in one hand, a blanket draped over her shoulder. You always pick the coldest spot in the yard, Eleanor teased gently. It's the quietest, Ava replied, smiling. Eleanor sat beside her, unrolling the blanket and tossing it over both their shoulders. They didn't speak for a while. They just listened. To the wind in the roses, to the quiet of healing, to the sound of life beginning again. I don't remember every detail, Ava said softly. There are still gaps. Still moments that don't come back. Eleanor nodded. You're not broken for forgetting. I used to think I needed to remember everything to be whole. And now? I just need to remember who I am. Eleanor smiled. You're Ava Callahan, survivor, founder, sister, and apparently, she added, glancing at the sketchbook, an excellent memoirist. Ava laughed. It's not a memoir. Not yet. Maybe someday. She paused, eyes serious. But it's a start. A moment later, Richard appeared in the distance, walking slowly along the path with a tray, 3 mugs of hot cider. He was older now, and softer. He wore a sweater Ava had bought him at a thrift shop. When he reached them, he set the tray down and joined them on the bench. I brought cinnamon, he said. You remembered, Ava said, surprised. I'm learning, he replied. They clinked mugs in the fading light, like a silent toast to everything that hadn't destroyed them, and everything that had made them. From the house, faint piano music floated across the garden. It was the same song Julia used to hum when cooking, Claire de Lune. Ava's lips curved. She's here, isn't she? She asked softly. Eleanor nodded. In every word you write, and every girl we help. They sat in silence again. Then Ava reached for Eleanor's hand. She took it gently. You saved me, she whispered. Eleanor shook her head, eyes shining. No, we saved each other. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, the shadows lengthened, but this time they felt gentle, like velvet, not like cages. Ava turned back to her journal. She flipped to a blank page and began to write. I was 9 when I disappeared, but I was 18 when I came home. I was lost in the dark. But the light found me again. In a courtroom. In a sister. In a garden at dusk. And so it was that the girl who once stood at the gate, muddy, silenced, forgotten, was no longer a ghost. She was a woman, a writer, a light. And the gate? It remained open. Forever. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. Somewhere out there, another Ava may still be waiting. To be seen, to be believed, to be loved for who she truly is. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment, share your thoughts, or simply hit subscribe to help us bring more healing stories to life. See you in the next video.